So I would be very worried about the way that our technology is being built right now by large organizations and governments that really don't care much about individual rights or privacies. I think the focus should be on how can we build technology that still allows us to scale and still allows us to innovate exponentially, but allows us to retain some of those rights and privacies. I believe it can be done, but it's going to be a lot of hard work and it's going to require a lot of open-minded thinking. When you look at different elements of society and you look at different outputs of cultures and societies, whether you care about peace, education, health, innovation, patent rates, the evidence is clear. Open, free societies that are decentralized are better for humans. For example, in peace, no two free nations have ever fought one another in the history of humanity. That's like the only ironclad law of political theory. If you look at patent rates, open, free countries have patent rates that are so much higher than closed ones. If you look at life expectancy, if you look at equality, if you look at literacy rates, if you look at maternal health rates, if you look at infant mortality rates, these things are always best in open, free countries, and they're worst in total dictatorships. So whether you care about health or peace or education or science or math or equality, no matter what you care about, you should care about freedom and human rights.
Alex Gladstein é diretor de estratégia na Human Rights Foundation, vice-presidente de estratégia na Oslo Freedom Forum desde 2009. Foi conselheiro de política externa no Parlamento Britânico. É formado em Relações Internacionais e Estudos do Médio Oriente. Especialista em governação, defende que todos os cidadãos devem participar na luta global pela liberdade e pelos direitos humanos. Para Gladstein, os governos construíram sistemas de vigilância eficazes, exercendo mais controlo sobre os cidadãos, principalmente nos países onde há ditaduras. Defende que a tecnologia é usada contra os cidadãos e que redes descentralizadas como as Bitcoin podem ajudar a fortalecer as liberdades civis e desafiar essa consolidação do poder. Inimigo das ditaduras e do estado de vigilância, desenvolveu a campanha Flash Drives for Freedom.
One of the major reasons why people don't care about freedom and human rights is because they don't realize what a crisis we're in. A lot of the narratives around pursuing global change and making the world a better place are driven by the United Nations, which is not really a normative organization, in my opinion. The United Nations is a place for all kinds of governments, regardless of how legitimate they are, to come together and basically be able to negotiate with each other. It has somehow transformed into a normative body that issues statements about how the world should be. That's problematic. The United Nations exists as a very important function to allow countries to come together and negotiate peacefully on differences. That's what its function should be. It cannot be a function going around telling other people what to do and what to care about when it comes to human rights, because it's deeply flawed. Whereas it's useful for the United Nations to serve as a body for consensus among countries, because it's one country, one vote. It's not useful for human rights because most of the countries serving at the UN are human rights violators. And most of the countries on the United Nations Human Rights Council are terrible violators of human rights, including China and Cuba and Saudi Arabia. I mean, these are the countries that get to decide on what human rights violations we should focus on. So because of this, the United Nations has kind of distracted us in many ways through so many of its goals and bodies. The Millennium Development Goals, the Sustainable Development Goals, UNESCO, the World Bank, so many sort of establishment organizations that are either kind of powered by the UN or influenced by the UN have kind of distracted us from the real issue at hand, which is authoritarianism and the fact that 4 billion people don't have a voice. So we need to do what we can in the business community, in the private sector, in the technology community to help protect and promote democracy and civil liberties.
그리움과 뜨거운 경모의 정을 담아 위대한 김일성 동지와 김정일 동지께 가장 숭고한 경위와 새 인사를 삼가드립니다.
What is flash drives for freedom? So when we study authoritarian governments at the Human Rights Foundation, we notice that the most extreme versions, the totalitarian governments, they rely on total censorship and control of information. So this could include Cuba, Uzbekistan, Eritrea, North Korea. And what we realized is that it's a very powerful thing to send information into these countries so that people can learn about the outside world.
There's a new and unconventional effort
to get information into North Korea
by sneaking information into the country on USB drives.
Human rights activists are now collecting old USB sticks,
urging people to donate their old flash drives by popping them in these slots.
Pack it with information, whether it's Wikipedia,
movies, TV shows, ebooks.
In a bid, obviously, to undermine the regime's lies and propaganda, which it feeds to its own people every single day.
To open up their eyes to the fact that there is a world outside what they've been led to believe.
And if you think about it, that is very dangerous for Kim Jong-un, because if people get a sense that the image of America that he has carefully painted for them is false, he could have huge problems.
We believe that freedom of information is a fundamental right. Without accessing information, it's impossible to form your own consciousness.
Of course, watching this information helped me to realize there was some humanity out there.
If we continue and expand our activity of disseminating information to educate North Korean people in the long run, I'm absolutely sure that North Korean people one day would stand up to change the course.
So how can exponential technology help authoritarian governments? I think that we need to consider there's two ways for a society to scale. One is in a centralized way and one is in a decentralized way. And it is easier at first to scale a society in a centralized way, meaning from a dictatorship. It can do more transactions per second. It doesn't need to deal with privacy or freedom of the press or independent courts or lawyers or annoying protesters. It can just do whatever it wants. But long-term, decentralized systems are more dynamic, more innovative, and stronger. It's like this in any sort of environment, whether you're looking at companies, different sorts of tribal organisms, any sort of structure. Decentralization has massive, massive benefits over centralization. And we need to consider this when we look at how governments are using technology. The easy way to go would be to start to copy what China is doing, which is innovate along the lines of centralization and start to gather up as much data as possible about your citizens, which is what China is doing. So the idea would be to convince, in a country like Portugal or the United States, to convince Facebook and Uber and Amazon and all the companies to give the data to the government. So that the government can then start making determinations about people based on their behavior. This is a possibility that we need to stop, okay? The other way to scale is decentralized. So the other way to scale is by building both checks and balances in the system to prevent one actor from becoming too powerful. So this is like best typified by the geographical separation of Silicon Valley and Washington, D.C. in the United States. It's actually really helpful that they're 3,000 miles apart. So how can technology be used to promote freedom? We need to look at the two kinds of technology that we have. One kind is authoritarian technology, like artificial intelligence, big data, machine learning. This technology, these kinds of technologies are basically going to be used by governments against their people. There are other kinds of technologies, though. Encryption, cryptography, Bitcoin, censorship-resistant storage, decentralized payment networks, the open internet itself. So these are technologies that are anti-authoritarian and that empower the individual more than a large organization like a government or a state or a company. And these are the ones that we should be focusing on from a human rights perspective and learning about how we can scale these things. Usually these are defensive technologies, meaning they're very, very cheap to defend and very expensive to attack, which means that they have some sort of downside. In the case of Bitcoin, for example, it's censorship resistant and it's unstoppable and it's decentralized, which is great, but it's not private, it's not fungible, it is not fast, it is not cheap, and it is not efficient. So the creators of Bitcoin, much like the creators of other decentralized networks, they made a trade-off from an engineering perspective, and they decided to focus on decentralization and censorship resistance. The question is, can we innovate and create second-layer technologies on top of Bitcoin, or can we change Bitcoin so that it retains censorship resistance and yet is able to scale so that more people can use it? Ultimately, to be able to fight authoritarian technology, we're going to need anti-authoritarian technology that works at scale for billions of people. So why does Bitcoin matter for the future of freedom? I think we should take a historical context here and look at the fact that before Bitcoin, it was not possible for me to send money to you across a long distance without having to trust a third party, whether that be a merchant or a bank or an intermediary or a friend or a government or a company. You always had to trust somebody, whether it be Visa or Western Union, etc. With the invention of Bitcoin, all of a sudden, you and I only need internet access to be able to send and receive value to anyone else around the world. And these transactions are not stoppable. They're not censorable. That's really powerful. So in the same way that the first killer app of the internet was email, which of course is still very important, but that was really all the internet had for a long time, was email, sending messages. Over time, people innovated and they figured out you could do a lot more than just email on the internet, right? You could actually do search and you could do apps and you could do all kinds of amazing things. I think you're going to see the same technology curve with Bitcoin. Right now, the only real thing you can do with Bitcoin at the moment is send and receive money, which still will always be very important. However, Bitcoin is a decentralized network that can be a foundational technology layer for other things to go on top. And that's what I'm very excited about. I mean, it really gets exciting when you start connecting Bitcoin to other kinds of technologies. One I often mention is Lightning Network, which is a decentralized payment structure. So when you attach Lightning to Bitcoin, you get a really interesting combination because you get, on the bottom layer, Bitcoin censorship resistance. But you add that to Lightning and you get speed and you get privacy and you get efficiency. So there's ways that you can combine technologies for them to be very, very potent. I'm an optimist. Despite what I see in the human rights space and despite the suffering that people endure in dictatorships around the world, I do think we are on a track of progress. And when I look at a new technology like Bitcoin and cryptocurrency and blockchain, I want to be careful in assessing the risks and the possibilities. But after some very careful assessment, I will say that the rewards, I think, outweigh the risks when it comes to Bitcoin for human rights. The technology unlocked by people being able to own their own money without having to trust a government or a central authority are very meaningful evolutions. And The risks of criminals using these things, the risk of individuals using open, truly permissionless blockchains like Bitcoin for bad are certainly there, but they're far outweighed by the potentially massive positive impact Bitcoin can act and have in the world as an escape valve for people living under an authoritarian governments. So you're seeing in countries like Iran, Venezuela, Turkey, lots of interest in Bitcoin. Because in these countries, Bitcoin represents an easy way to move money around in a way that the government cannot inflate and cannot devalue to nothing. So if you've been living in Venezuela where your cup of coffee went from 450 bolivars to 4,500 to 4.5 million, that's not going to work for you. You need some other kind of currency. And dollars are hard to come by. So people were able to start using Bitcoin and other kinds of cryptocurrency. So in Venezuela, we have the people using Bitcoin as an escape valve. They're using Bitcoin to escape from hyperinflation and to store their value in something that the government cannot just print more of and devalue. At the same time, you have the Venezuelan regime creating its own private, censorable, surveillable cryptocurrency called the petro. So you have the government pushing its own cryptocurrency on the one hand and the people using another one on the other hand. The difference between the petro and Bitcoin is as big of a difference as the difference between dictatorship and democracy. And this is a war that people are fighting, and they're going to fight. More and more governments are going to bring their own national cryptocurrencies online and try to force people to use them. And more people are going to turn to technologies like Bitcoin to escape. And that's what the crypto war is.
Entendo que a tecnologia pode ser algo que nos pode ajudar no modelo de governação para oferecer melhor qualidade de vida, melhores serviços aos nossos concidadãos, mas sem retirar aquilo que, para mim, é das maiores conquistas da humanidade nos últimos milhares de anos, que é a liberdade dos nossos concidadãos. Agora, é preciso equilibrar liberdade com a nossa liberdade termina onde começa a liberdade dos outros e, portanto, os Estados têm que garantir segurança, os Estados têm que garantir equidade, os Estados têm que garantir equilíbrio nas suas sociedades. Mas isso não quer dizer que se possa extravasar os limites daquilo que eu considero que é a esfera pessoal de cada um de nós e cada um de nós tem que, em si mesmo, na célula constituinte de toda esta sociedade, nós não podemos de maneira nenhuma intervir ou entrar para dentro dessa barreira privada.
We need to be very careful about our technology. Increasingly, our phones and devices define us. They represent how we connect with each other. And if we don't bake in privacy and freedom into these devices and technologies and networks, we're going to lose those freedoms and privacies.
Dag Fien. Even kijken. Voilà. Ik zie een school tegen Antwerpen.
Ja.
Insecten.
Dat blieft?
Ik voel 2 insecten op je rug. Kan dat?
Ja, vlinders.
Slovenië?
Zo hè.
Een moto. Oranje.
Pas erop.
Zenit?
Oui, oui, bien.
Je hebt een vriendin. Julie de...
Ja.
Een boeiend liefdesleven. 3, 4 zelfs?
De 4e, daar zwijg ik meestal over, dus dat weten niet veel mensen.
Hoe is het met je spierscheur? Une maison rouge, balcon blanc. Ja. Ik zie geld, ik zie transacties. Maar kent je rekeningnummer van buiten? Ik denk dat ik het wel weet. Die staat wel negatief op je bankrekening.
Ja?
9-7. Last month, you spent €200 on alcohol. Vorige maand €300 aan kleding gespendeerd. 8, 5, voor een huis dat van eigenaar gaat veranderen? 795.000 euro.
Ja, eigenlijk.
41.
Ja.
Is dat juist?
Ja, dat is juist. Oh my god. Oh nee. Ah, dat is, ik weet niet hoe eng.
The price of freedom is eternal vigilance. So if I were to bet, I would bet that all countries in the world are going to head towards a Chinese-style surveillance state. However, that's not inevitable. We can fight back and we can make a different future. However, it requires getting involved right now. And it requires building payment networks and communication networks and storage networks and social media that respects the rights and privacy of people and creates market and incentive structures for people to want to have privacy and get people in the mindset of thinking about every time they get something for free online, like you get Facebook for free, meaning you're not paying Facebook, you're just paying with your privacy. If we can start getting people to understand this, that things that are free aren't free. There's no such thing as free. Anything that's free is selling your data. So people might get into the mindset of choosing to pay for resources and services that aren't going to sell their data. That's the game changer. Can we get there? It may not be easy. It's certainly not inevitable, but it's the only path we have away from this surveillance society, which has certainly taken root in the world's largest country. I think the point of view that Singularity University espouses, which is that big global challenges and problems represent big opportunities, is a beautiful one. And when translated into the world of human rights and democracy, what we see are nothing but possibilities. When you have half the world living under closed societies that restrict creativity, that restrict collaboration, that restrict freedom, that restrict artistic freedom, that restrict writing, that restrict journalism, that restrict partnerships, that restrict education, that restrict information, what we have are so many different futures and possibilities where those people live under free countries. Just imagine what they're capable of, what they're being held back from doing. I mean, look at a country like North Korea. How many potential Nobel Prize winners, how many potential brilliant scientists and founders are being wasted under these authoritarian systems where they're not allowed to disrupt, where they're not allowed to live out their dreams. So if we can properly succeed in our area of promoting human rights and democracy and freedom, and we can make more gains and more advances, I think we're going to have a lot more to add to the global innovation space. If every country was truly free and open, and every country had a government that was held in check by its people, and every country had a rigorous free press, and every country was built in a way where no one person or group could control everything in society, this would be a very beautiful world. So I see nothing but positivity in the future.